Hi tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. Let's get right into it because there's a lot to get to. Hi tea sippers, welcome to an all new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. And if you like politics, this is where you get your tea. Most importantly, I'm your host, Mark Long. I bring it to you fresh every single week, and this week we're diving right into the chaos at the United States airports. Right now, long lines are building as we speak, with 200-minute waits. And that's because there's a lack of funding in DHS, and a lot of people aren't showing up to work because the federal agents there are not getting paid. Take a listen.
Some of the longest and most frustrating security lines travelers have ever seen are getting longer this morning at some of America's biggest airports.
There's priorities, and this is one of them. This is crazy.
To help, the Trump administration says it's sending in hundreds of ICE agents.
We're simply there to help TSA do their job in areas that don't need their specialized expertise, such as screening through the x-ray machine. Not training that, we won't do that.
The president is blaming Democrats for not funding the Department of Homeland Security, saying on Monday, ICE will be going to airports to help our wonderful TSA agents who have stayed on the job. But Democrats have offered to pay TSA officers in every part of Homeland Security except for ICE and Border Control, and Republicans are rejecting that deal. The president of the union that represents TSA workers says in a statement that putting ICE at airports won't help, writing that putting untrained personnel at security checkpoints does not fill a gap, it creates one. Without a paycheck, TSA workers are making ends meet by calling out and working other jobs. Both of Houston's airports are seeing nearly half their staffs call out. New Orleans, Atlanta, and JFK, all more than 30%. Those call-outs are leading to painful scenes like these.
This is crazy.
Long lines in New Orleans stretching deep into parking garages.
Maybe 2 hours, you kind of lose track.
And this was the line in Atlanta. Travelers reporting wait times of 153 minutes.
It was massive. I've never seen anything like it.
Katrina Terrell got to the airport 3 hours early for her flight out of Atlanta, but couldn't make it through this winding TSA line in time and missed her flight.
All right, so that was Good Morning America reporting this morning about the recent delays at airports, and you can see things are trickling down based on what's happening in Congress. But let me give you the counter perspective on why Trump might be doing this and why he's saying that this is happening. So Trump believes that deploying ICE to airports is a pressure tactic, basically showing some force and letting a political message basically come into fruition that there is going to be some support, whether we like it or not, and Trump's here to save the day by providing staff members or ICE agents, if you will, that are already funded for. So basically they're saying if TSA can't function, then ICE will. And there's also some talk about how TSA was short-staffed, as we saw in the video, with airports seeing half of their staff cut around the country. Now, Trump is framing this as ICE as a ready-to-go force to step in and to secure everything and to provide the security that's necessary. But there's some leverage here. So Trump is also explicitly tying the deployment to force Democrats to agree to his preferred DHS funding and immigration enforcement measures. He publicly threatened to send ICE to airports if Democrats didn't sign the agreement. Now, we see that's happening. So let's see a little bit more about what Trump is also saying to justify this. Trump is also suggesting that ICE agents would not basically help out with anything other than security and long lines, but also said that they're also there to arrest undocumented immigrants at airports if necessary. There is also some further talk about security being the top priority, and kind of he was showcasing this as more of a patriotic move and a tough on immigration action, while promising that people will be able to travel comfortably and not have to worry about being freaked out by anyone that they suspect of being an immigrant. Now, there's also some talk about how this is a lot of political theater with ICE being pushed towards airports. We know that the main focus here is the funding, and I'm going to give you a breakdown of why the funding is a problem now, but here's a clip from The View this morning with Abby Huntsman returning to help co-host.
I was flying this weekend too, and I commend everyone that's I was in the Midwest and here, and everything went well. The travelers were great. I don't actually hate the idea of this right now. ICE has gotten billions of dollars. They've almost doubled their budget. we're talking about TSA workers who aren't getting paid, and the ones that are making it there are having to pay for gas prices and riding buses. And so if you want to fill in bodies here, because their success rate at finding criminals has been 5%. These are 100% guaranteed travelers coming through there. So I just feel like putting more people on the job, I don't see that as a bad thing.
You mean you want to feel safe when you take your kids to the airport?
Yeah.
It's crazy. We are spending billions of dollars on a war right now, what's going on in Iran. And we can't even feel safe in our airports. And Congress is still getting paid.
Yeah.
That's the craziest part of this whole thing. You have people that are not getting paychecks, is what people were saying, that are actually on the job. And the people that can't come together to fix the government are getting paid.
The second time in a year that they are missing paychecks. Remember, this government shutdown also happened last year, and and TSA agents again weren't paid. Just before coming on, Donald Trump was giving a press conference from the tarmac in West Palm Beach, and he said that Democrats were calling wanting to make a deal, and that he was instructing his people not to make a deal. So let's remember what Democrats are holding out for.
Yes.
Democrats want ICE agents to not wear masks, so they're not going around the streets terrorizing innocent people, and they want there to be judicial orders instead of administrative warrants. So they want people to go, they want ICE to go in front of a judge and get a warrant instead of being able to barge into people's house and drag people out in the cold and in the snow like they have.
And they want body cameras as well. They want them to wear body cameras, and that's why they're holding up funding. But let's be clear. This is a Republican choice. This is a Republican problem because Republicans have rejected those requests, and then the Democrats went back to the table and they said, okay, what about we just fund TSA? What about we just do that part and then we'll figure out the rest of the funding later? And Republicans rejected that as well. So this is a
Republican. Doesn't always take two, though, Sonny.
But this is really a Republican problem.
I think it's an American problem.
Just in my view, it's a Republican problem because they're the ones in Congress running it. And I don't feel comfortable at all having ICE agents there because ICE agents now only get instead of getting 72 days of training, they only get 42 days of training, and they are not trained the way TSA agents. Let's remember, TSA agents require at least 4 to 6 months of training, including 2 to 3 weeks at a TSA academy. It includes x-ray simulation, passenger screening, bag inspection, emergency protocols, and then they have to get recertified every couple of months. An ICE agent with 42 days of experience wearing a mask and no body camera has no business in our airports.
Okay, so a lot to get to from that clip on The View, and you can see the ladies have different opinions, and they're talking about, why it's important to staff the airports right now. But let's talk about what Democrats are basically pushing for when it comes to, I guess, our demands from this bill or from this funding deal. So Democrats are refusing to reopen DHS unless the Trump administration agrees specifically to reforms with immigration enforcement, because the way they've been handling it has been atrocious, not to mention. And we're also looking for an opportunity to limit ICE authority and to offer more accountability. Like, those are simple tasks. That's what we expect from our police officers. That's what they're here to protect us. ICE agents have killed 2 Americans. So also, there needs to be a lot of changes in the enforcement practices, because right now there's been lies from the top. We know Chrissy Nome was taken out of her position. And let's talk about more details on this. So Democrats have made it clear they will not fund DHS right now, based on what we talked about, especially regarding the Minneapolis killings. But most importantly, the reforms that Democrats are looking to push for is stricter limits on ICE enforcement actions, So specifically focusing on locations like airports, schools, and hospitals. So why are ICE agents showing up in schools, right? We don't want that. That's not what Democrats want right now. There's also a lot of asks from Democrats for there to be more oversight and accountability, specifically what happened after the killing of the 2 U.S. citizens by federal agents in Minneapolis. We know that the investigations and reporting requirements were completely off. There was no clue of what was happening. There was limited investigation as from direction of the President of the United States. We also know that we want some more limits from Trump's immigration agenda. So Democrats are pushing back on Trump and his attempts to basically expand ICE as his operational scope, while also looking to increase airport-based immigration enforcement, as we discussed before the View clip. Now, most importantly, let's get down to a little bit more information of what this does. So Democrats feel they have some leverage right now because since the shutdown, since February 14th, Airport chaos has just been increasing left and right. We also know that Senate Republicans have failed 5 times to advance a funding bill because they're trying to pressure Democrats not to push for some of these much needed efforts that DHS needs to oversee. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper because critics are saying this is a bad idea. And we know critics are saying this is a bad idea because CBS News is reporting on this, the ACLU, and The Guardian. So ICE is not trained for airport security. We know that Sonny was alluding to that. But most importantly, the slowdowning of lines, increasing mistakes, and compromising safety rather than improving it is some concerns that people are having. Most importantly, it blurs the line between security screening and immigration policing because ICE is a separate entity from our airport travel, from TSA, from those who are staffed and trained to do certain jobs at airports. And we know that civil rights groups around the country, as reported by the American, let me see this source, the ACLU, actually, they reported on this, but they're saying that groups are warning the mixing TSA functions with immigration enforcement creates fears amongst people and also establishes this climate of fear, which discourages lawful travel and risks racial profiling even at airports. So we know that there's a form of weaponization coming on, right? Because we've seen that happen with ICE agents with their, how they're carrying out their roles and the limited training and the loopholes in that. We know that critics are currently arguing that Trump used this ICE deployment as a threat, almost to kind of have a standoff with Democrats with turning airport operations into a bargaining chip rather than it being a public safety priority. And we know that they're short-staffed. So I don't understand Sarah's perspective of, let's staff it anyway. Sarah, what we need is trained people who are trained in handling business at airports. That's what we need. So I think she's completely missing the mark on that. So obviously we know the chaos is already at airports. And we know that with chaos comes a lack of stability, and adding ICE agents, obviously, is just a risky thing to do. It creates a bunch of operational confusion. There's going to be a lot of jurisdictional conflict here, especially with people who are fearful of traveling. And now we have longer delays and not shorter ones. And we know lines are already long as of this morning, but they have increasingly, haven't sped up the security efforts rather than slowed down most importantly, and I think that's very important to point out. And Trump's call on a heavy emphasis on arresting Somali immigrants also raises alarms because I do feel like this is a tactic with the president trying to get ahead of things that he's falsely creating with the American public by saying that people who are undocumented, i.e. Somali immigrants, are voting him out of office and trying to take spots from Republicans, and that's just not true. Most importantly, this in general just undermines the trust in federal agencies. It's a complete oversight. You're adding extra fuel to the fire here, and the airport security right now, as neutral and professional as it is, you're now adding this extra entity of this political this political avenue to everything where it doesn't need to be like this. And Trump has this complete, oversight of what he feels is protecting American citizens, when in reality, a lot of people are traveling this time of the year. A lot of families are on spring break. You have people who are of all ethnicities traveling all over the country. And this is not helping any kind of security at all whatsoever. I think this is an intention to scare Americans. I think this is for this administration to flex their authority in front of Democratic travelers and people who don't agree necessarily with everything that's going on in the country. And most importantly is to establish fear. We know this is a complete distraction from the Epstein files, and I'm going to say that every single time. And this is just a perfect example of the president trying to flex his authority and his strength and his power while we're in the middle of a freaking war. So everybody just needs to take the information of what they have. I give you all's perspective on why Trump is doing this and why he claims this is the right thing to do. But most importantly, look at how this is impacting travel. Obviously, if travel is impacted, safety then becomes impacted. Because you have people who are obviously losing sleep. There's flight delays everywhere. And now there is a recent report of a crash at one of the airports in the country. Take a listen to this.
Alright, we have some breaking news that should be concerning for every single American. In the middle of the night, 2 pilots were killed at LaGuardia Airport in New York after an Air Canada Express regional jet collided with a fire truck, a Port Authority fire truck, while landing at New York's LaGuardia Airport late last night. The 2 pilots of the plane were killed and dozens of people were injured in this collision. The airport will be shut down today until 2 p.m. Eastern Time, according to officials at LaGuardia, and this disruption is coming at one of the United States' busiest domestic airports and time of the year. Just to back up, every single American should find this incredibly concerning and incredibly terrifying. For a personal anecdote, my parents are flying back from an international trip in just a few days. I want them to be safe. For another personal anecdote, I spent 7 hours at LaGuardia Airport just about 2 or 3 days ago. If you guys have seen my CNN hits, I'm doing those in New York City. I stayed at LaGuardia, and dude, it's already kind of stressful traveling, right, for every American. Now, this added layer of stress coming from the Republicans, coming from the Trump administration, needs to stop immediately. I hate to immediately talk about the politics of this all, but the reality is it is inherently political. Donald Trump is currently delaying the refunding of TSA for political purposes, and I will prove that throughout this video. So as always, make sure you drop a like. Subscribe if you appreciate the Adam Mockler feed. We just hit 1.9 million subscribers. We are going for 2. And let's jump in with the really tragic breaking news. 2 dead after jet collides with truck at LaGuardia Airport. It's almost unbelievable. Like, this is like... It's one of my worst fears, to be honest, when I'm taking off or landing. I always think, okay, I hope everything goes smoothly in the takeoff and the landing section. And this is just... 2 pilots of Air Canada Express plane were killed, officials said, and dozens of passengers and crew members were hospitalized. The FAA says the airport will be closed until at least 2 p.m. this afternoon.
That was Adam Mockler. He's a YouTuber and he does a great job with, giving like the background scoop on things and giving the right perspective with facts and actual information and not relying on sources that come through like Fox News or anything like on Truth Social from the president. So let's talk a little bit more details about what CNN is saying about everything. So what went wrong, right? Because they're talking about that there's a lack of communication failures at LaGuardia, and CNN was reporting one thing that was unmistakably clear. They're saying that investigators are zeroing down in regards to the fire rescue truck that was there and the Air Canada flight and the air traffic control tower. And they're saying that something went wrong between those 3 entities, and now there's more information coming on as well. So with more information, the Air Canada jet was cleared to land. So that's something that was definitely confirmed by CNN and by other reports coming from this recent collision. And the fire truck was also moving on the runway at the time. So between that happening and the radio calls between the fire truck and the tower, landing clearance was given to the Air Canada flight in general. So there was a lack of communication between the staff there. We know obviously that there was a sudden impact and a lot of screaming and confusion, along with 41 injuries reported and 2 deaths from the pilots. So with that being said, we know that there's more information that's been coming out about this, but let's be very clear. All this chaos that's happening at the airports right now could have been avoided, and honestly, this could not have happened at the worst time where ICE is already deployed there and people are already on edge. But now we're having incidences where planes have been crashing left and right since Trump got in office. Planes have been crashing left and right, and there has been a lack of support at airports, and things are feeling completely unsafe and unregulated again. And I don't know if that's part of his plan on Make America Great Again, but do you all feel like America's great because you're seeing ICE agents at airports where staff are already not getting paid, and there's people who aren't trained to handle certain conflicts at airports, such as security entities and reading monitors and all that kind of stuff? This is all a shit show. And I think this comes to prove that when we vote, we have to vote in the best interest of the American people and what we want our government to look like, and not align behind one person who you think is the end-all be-all. Trump isn't God. And we know that this is all a pivot, so much of the point that Trump has even appointed the correct people to oversee what's happening at airports. All this confusion of what's happening on the ground. So let me give you a little bit of background information on basically everything that's been going down at airports since Donald Trump became president for the second time. So, when Donald Trump returned the second time, we know that the White House obviously was preparing for a huge shift. But most importantly, he promised to bring order back to America's transportation systems. But within months of his inauguration, we already knew that his new appointee for the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, was going to completely mess this up. Between a lack of experience and also the staffing shortages that were already in place, things were already set to not go as planned or go well. Controllers were aging out. We have training pipelines that were thin, and there was talks of the agency was already being stretched to the point where there needed to be more oversight in the first place. But most importantly, let's dive a little bit more deeper into what's been happening. There came an order from Secretary Duffy, which was a 10% cut in flights at the 40 major airports across the United States, which was a move that he framed as a safety measure, but we all know it's complete bullshit, and it was for, saving money. They wanted to not put as much money in this because they don't need that much money. They don't need funds to run a already messed up department, right? So with that being said, we know that airlines were scrambling to adjust the schedules, and there are a lot of systems that were going down last summer as well as spring of last year, as well as the amount of cancellations and delays. And people say that they happen all the time at airports, and yes, that is true, but they, miraculously increased since Trump decided to run his game with making sure that he was the one to appoint someone to do this job. So we know watchdog groups were tracking something even more alarming. So there's a rise in aviation disasters, and according to the revolving door project aviation tracker, the U.S. already had 184 aviation disasters and 387 fatalities since Trump took office the second time. Now, this includes the first fatal commercial crash on U.S. soil since 2009, right? Now, safety experts pointed to the same root of the problem, right? So the weakened oversight that we talked about, the reduced staffing, the FAA, struggling to keep pace with demand. And we know the shutdown only deepened the chaos. We have people who aren't getting paid. We already know that delays are abundant from airports like the Atlanta one to the one in Chicago to New York. There's hundreds of cancellations and hour-long delays, and not to mention the long lines just to get through security and also for baggage claim. Now, if you're traveling right now, I don't know what it's like, so I'm sending my best wishes to you all, but this is absolutely the responsibility of the Trump administration. This is the responsibility of the Trump administration and the Republicans playing ball with the Americans in their ability to travel across the country. Not only is this a game from the president to try to cover up the Epstein files, this is also a game to try to hold some kind of power as if the current DHS funding bill that they're proposing is important enough to meet the needs of every American. We had 2 Americans that were murdered in Minneapolis. Now we have the lack of oversight here at airports that is continuing since this president got in office. Between all of the crashes that has happened and the lack of control and communication between officials at airports, it seems like there's been a lot of risks that were taken, including not funding entities that need the funds, most importantly, working with the head honchos who are overseeing these large companies, reducing their oversight and their staffing with instruction from the president and his rich billionaire friends. So this is something that you all need to pay attention to, but most importantly, make sure you are being safe while you're traveling, and also take precaution. During this time, it's not the best time to travel. Trump has completely made it impossible for Americans to enjoy their experiences unless you're rich and you have private jets. And right now, the people who are suffering right now are the American people. Just remember this. Come election day, in the midterms and in 2028, what was your experience like during the second Trump presidency? Did gas prices come down? Were grocery prices down? Was traveling easier? Were you able to afford vacation? Were you living paycheck to paycheck? There's a lot of things to consider here. And right now, it looks like the president is failing at keeping his promises. So much for making America great again. Shifting gears a little bit, tea sippers, I want to point to some semi-great news. I wish drag queens didn't have to come and save the day all the time, but there's a drag queen that is testifying in Ohio against a performance ban, and a lot of you might find this queen familiar, so take a listen.
Drag performers just testified at the State House against a bill that would ban drag shows anywhere other than adult entertainment locations. Good evening, welcome in. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Katie Houston.
And I'm Damon Maloney. The bill comes after protests over drag shows and story hours all across the state. News 5's Columbus Bureau reporter Morgan Trout tells us why some lawmakers want the ban and how this could impact the arts.
Growing up in a conservative family, Andrew Levitt says he hid himself for years.
I was also worried that if people truly knew who I was, I would no longer belong or fit in.
But in college, he says he found his identity.
Drag is something that saved my life. When I met entertainers who are drag queens, they gave me a place to call home when I didn't have a place to live, when I didn't have the familial support that I was so desperately needing.
When Levitt gets on stage, he transforms into nationally awarded drag queen Nina West.
I'm an entertainer who has proudly worked with incredible companies like Disney. I've written a children's book. I have released a children's album.
But he worries about a bill that would impact his art.
This statute simply says you can't perform that obscene performance with a minor being present.
Toledo area Republican Josh Williams introduced a bill that would ban drag performances in any places other than adult cabarets, which include nightclubs and sex shops. Ohio has a statute regarding performances that are harmful to juveniles or obscene. This used to just apply to exotic dancers, but now Williams wants to add a provision on people who exhibit a gender identity that is different from the performers or entertainers' gender assigned at birth, using clothing or makeup.
We've seen performances at public parks that cross the line.
Drag is not a crime, and this is a slippery slope when you want to put us in a specific venue or area or part of town. We're compartmentalizing and dangerously placing people in boxes.
Williams says the bill wouldn't apply to appropriate drag, and it's written in a way that obscenity could be determined by individual law enforcement.
Well, I thought that was really cool. That was Nina West from Drag Race, and she does a great job in terms of advocating for our community. She's always been involved, and she's a famous drag queen, if you will. She also performs on Broadway and was in Hairspray, and I just love what she's doing in her state of Ohio and testifying about the performance ban. You know, I keep hearing this phrase. About America First, and it's everywhere, right? Especially when MAGA was coming back into their own, especially the second time around. Obviously, their red hats, their bumper stickers, people's Facebook rants about it, in all caps at 2 a.m., and you have to block people, that whole thing. And every time I hear it, I think, okay, great, prioritize the country then. Let's see if you can prioritize the country. Keep people safe. If that's what you want to prioritize, go ahead and do it. You know, but there was no talk of putting us in a war. There was no talk of, and there's currently no talk, if you will, of keeping us out of an unnecessary war. So there has been this weird shift of not focusing on things that actually matter to Americans, like the cost of groceries and the actual safety of our lives, which is sustainability and being able to afford our everyday life. But somehow there's this America First thing got turned into this America First, but only if we finish policing Bad Bunny, if we move to police drag queens that read books to 5-year-olds in libraries, or if we start policing drag performances at gay clubs and parking lots. How do we even get here? How did this extreme shift from America First to policing things that don't really matter, to getting us in a war, to not making sure that dollars are being sent here so that Americans can afford their life? So how did a slogan about America First that was supposed to be about a national strength and stability and, you know, everybody being able to work a full-time job and, you know, blah, 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 and protecting the homeland, protecting children, whatever they're claiming that this is. If you're putting America first, shouldn't the priority be, I don't know, keeping us out of global conflict instead of worrying about drag performances? Maybe making sure we're not sending troops into an endless war would be necessary instead of focusing on, you know, what a drag queen is doing to the song that Britney Spears performed in the 90s. The energy here is so lopsided with this administration, with conservatives nowadays, that there's all this policing of entertainment while we're right now putting ourselves as a national threat to other places, and while we're also losing a lot of support with our own partners in our own nations that were within us, a part of us in the United Nations, excuse me. So here's the wild part. The same people that are yelling freedom and the ones that are trying to legislate art, talk about what adults can wear, all that stuff, and, basically saying that communities are in jeopardy because people exist, basically. The wild part is that freedom for them means restricting everyone else. And there's almost kind of like this patriotic funhouse mirror that is basically about hypocrisy. It's something that they hate about themselves. The ability to express, to go against the grain, to go to a drag show, to allow drag performers to do their thing without being jeopardized or being under the microscope of the government. Because if America First really meant America First, we'd be celebrating creativity and not criminalizing it and then putting us in endless wars and not prioritizing people's discomfort for drag shows and LGBTQ plus people. Like, that's not even important. Like, why is that even in the mainstream right now? People cannot even afford their freaking dinner. There's people that are living paycheck to paycheck. It's almost kind of like there's a complete disconnect from all these rich billionaires up top, and there's a focus on unnecessary needs like defending drag performances. We shouldn't even have to do that in 2026. If you don't like a drag show, don't go. If you bring your kid to an adult drag show, you're a dumbass. Pretty much plain and simple. I wish our country could get back to a place where we can see clearly through what's happening that Trump is trying to create a situation and distraction to show and flex his power because he feels invincible right now because he's staying out of jail along with Netanyahu. And when you give somebody that much power, they're going to try to distract people in every way they can. That's what dictators do. And that's what people who are dictator adjacent try to do. People who admire dictatorship, people who admire power and money. They don't care about Americans that are living paycheck to paycheck. They don't care about representation. They don't care about DEI, as they like to make it seem like that was this complete disease that was plaguing America. They don't care about history. They don't care about facts. They don't care about science. So when you're going to vote this November and when you go back in 2028, we have to do our job because these people right now are absolutely atrocious, and I hope everyone stays safe out there with everything that's happening in the country. And try to find some positivity. If there's a cause that you feel that is important to you, stand up and advocate for it like Nina West is doing. I do the same thing by bringing it to you fresh every single week on Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long. Thank you for listening to another episode. I'll see you all next time.